This story is true, and I'm the girl they said would never amount to anything. I was just a waitress. He dumped me for not being on his level. 6 months later, I bought the company his father built and I fired him, in front of the entire board. You might wonder how did I go from invisible to untouchable? This happened in New York's financial district where every move is worth millions, and silence when used right speaks louder than revenge. If you've ever been underestimated, this story is for you. I am Ivy, 25 years old, working part-time at a cafe in Brooklyn. I was studying economics, dreaming of one day working in finance. My life was simple, quiet. But I believed in love, the kind strong enough to cross class line status and whispered judgments. That's when I met Connor Morgan. He walked into the cafe one rainy afternoon, ordered an espresso, and smiled like we had a secret. He was 27, tall, confident, charming, and the son of Harold Morgan, chairman of one of Manhattan's most powerful investment firms. But when we were together, he didn't act superior. He once said, "You make things feel more real," and I believed him. Foolishly. After almost a year together, he never once made our relationship public. No photos, no mentions at events. When I asked, he'd laugh and say, "You don't need all that fake validation, right?" I nodded, but something inside me started to tighten. One night at a family party, I saw his mother hand a family heirloom ring to a blonde girl. No one told me who she was, but I knew. Then I overheard one of his friends mutter loud enough for me to hear, "The waitress of the week's kinda cute." I smiled, softly. But in that moment, I knew I was standing at the edge of a world that was never going to let me in. After that party, Connor started changing. Fewer texts, fewer dates. When I asked, he said he was just busy with work. But what I felt was distance. Not because he was busy, but because he'd stopped trying. One day, I told him I was applying for an MBA scholarship in London, something I'd dreamed of long before I met him. He paused, then said, "I just don't think that's right for you. It's really competitive. You'd probably be disappointed." I laughed it off. But deep down, I knew he didn't believe in me. He never did. Then came the night that changed everything. He invited me to a private investment party. But when we got there, he turned to me and whispered, "A lot of important people tonight. Just stay outside, I'll be right back." I waited. 30 minutes. An hour. Through the rooftop glass, I saw him smiling brightly with the same girl who'd been handed the family ring. I didn't wait any longer. I got in a cab and went home. The next morning, he texted me, "We're not a good match. Don't wait." No explanation, no face-to-face. Just a sentence like tossing out an old coat. And me, the girl who believed love could cross class lines, had just been officially cut from the game. I disappeared for a few days. No food, no sleep, no phone. I just walked like I was trying to escape my own name. Brooklyn was wet that week. Cold rain soaked my shoes and my chest felt like it was trapped under ice, but walking hurt less than standing still. I didn't talk to anyone. Didn't look anyone in the eye. Until one night I wandered into the 24-hour corner store near my apartment. I meant to grab ramen and some crackers, cheap comfort food, but my hand paused at the counter. A stack of lottery tickets. Without thinking, I pulled one, like a reflex. I didn't believe in miracles. I just wanted to touch something that didn't remind me of Connor. Something unrelated to rejection, judgment, or locked doors. A week later, curled up on my mattress, I got an email. The subject line made my heart hiccup. "Congratulations, your ticket has matched all numbers." I thought it was a scam. Checked once, then twice, then again. It wasn't a mistake. I had won $98 million. I didn't scream, didn't cry. I just sat there, very still. For the first time in days, I turned on the light. And in that soft glow, I understood I could walk away. disappear, live quietly somewhere no one would ever know my name. Or I could go back. Not for revenge, but to finish a game he never thought I was smart enough to play. I opened my laptop, created an offshore account, booked a meeting with a law firm in Midtown, and sent one text to the only friend I trusted: I'm going away for a while. But next time you see me, I won't be standing in the same place. I rented a small apartment in Manhattan under a different name. No social media, no paper trail. I vanished from my old life and quietly began building a new one. For 6 months, I studied, not from textbooks, but from the real world. Company structures, supply chains, financial loopholes, how offshore funds move in silence. I hired a Swiss legal team experts in building clean, invisible financial webs. I created my first company, a family office investment fund. No face, no public name. Just one of the thousands of legal entities humming on Wall Street. But this one was mine. I started acquiring small shares in Morgan Holdings' outer supply network. Not the flagship companies, the overlooked links, the ones that, if leveraged, could shift the whole chain. At the same time, I hired a rogue economist once fired by Morgan Holdings for not fitting the company culture. He gave me exactly what I needed: internal reports, confidential meeting logs, staffing maps, and most importantly, Connor's blind spots. I found out he wasn't meant to be permanent CEO, just a placeholder until his father retired. And the board. They weren't thrilled. They were waiting for a stumble, or a replacement. I didn't rush. When I struck, it had to be deliberate, like a symphony perfectly tuned, waiting on a single note. After 6 months, I held indirect shares in 14 companies tied to Morgan's logistics and tech stack. I made small adjustments: pricing changes, shipment delays, supplier renegotiations, enough to cause internal strain and force the board to call emergency meetings. Connor started getting nervous. He couldn't trace where the tremors came from. And me, I was nowhere, and everywhere. I thought I was close to the finish line. The subsidiaries were cracking. Morgan's supply chain had slowed. Investors were growing nervous. I entered quiet negotiations with 3 senior board members. They wanted new leadership, someone who understood finance systems and risk. They chose me. We reached a silent deal: I'd inject capital through my fund to restructure Morgan Holdings. In return, I'd step in as strategic director. I was so close, but I forgot one thing: Connor might be reckless, but his family wasn't. A week before the final vote, Connor announced a newly signed deal with a major Asian tech conglomerate. The contract had one line that changed everything: CEO must remain unchanged for a minimum of 24 months, or merger is void. The board panicked. Morgan's stock was already sliding. Without the merger, the company would lose nearly $300 million in valuation. I was cornered. I had to agree to keep Connor, at least on paper. I couldn't oppose it, because, in a twist of irony, I was also an investor in that very merger through another shell fund. To kill it would be to cut my own throat. In that closed-door meeting, Connor looked at me for the first time in years. He smiled, not arrogantly, but calmly. "You think you just won your last move?" I asked without looking at him. "No," he replied. "I just know you're not cold enough to kill the company with me in it." And he was right. I didn't kill it. I stepped back from the board. But in that moment, something became crystal clear. If I wanted to end this game, I wouldn't just need strategy. I'd need to dismantle the armor around him first. Connor thought he'd won. He smiled for the cameras, gave interviews as the new CEO of a company that quietly I owned. What he didn't know was that the very clause protecting him was about to belong to me. It took me 3 weeks to digest the defeat, and one night to rewrite the entire plan. I started tracing it backward. The tech conglomerate that signed the merger with Morgan was headquartered in Shenzhen. But the real decision-making power, it belonged to an independent fund in Singapore, Orisun Partners. And luckily, or rather by design, Orisun was undergoing internal restructuring. They needed liquidity. They needed someone to take over part of their portfolio. I never appeared. I used a separate entity registered in Luxembourg, Andera Limited. 6 weeks later, Andera acquired 17% of Orisun's voting shares, including full authority to renegotiate the merger terms with Morgan Holdings. No headlines, no whispers. Connor had no idea. He kept showing up to board meetings wearing that same smile of untouchable power. Meanwhile, I held the pen behind the clause that protected him. In a closed meeting, I, through Orisun, proposed to remove the no termination of CEO condition. The Orisun team, which was essentially me, agreed. The Morgan board hesitated until the deal was presented as a win-win. They never knew who orchestrated it. I remember the exact moment Connor realized something was wrong. It was when he opened the updated merger file and read non-termination clause removed at the request of Orisun Partners, legal representation Andera Limited. I stood up, didn't look at anyone, just said, Connor, you once said I wasn't cold enough. You were wrong. I was just waiting for the perfect moment to freeze everything. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for a Monday morning. No one knew they were about to attend a burial, not of a man, but of a legacy. Connor walked in wearing the same tailored navy suit, slicked back hair, and that signature smug look. This time, no one stood to greet him. I sat at the head of the table. On my left, my attorney. On my right, the financial rep from Andera Limited. On the table sat a thick binder documents confirming the latest voting rights transfers. I now controlled over 38% of the company through indirect ownership across linked entities. The chairman tried to speak first, but I led the presentation. I didn't say much. I just hit play. First, recording Connor at a private party calling his staff parasites. Second, a casual conversation about leaking insider data to stabilize stock price. Third, his laugh echoing. They think I show up on time because I work hard. I just give them the illusion of safety. Silence. Thick. Like smoke after a shot's been fired. Connor tried to stand and defend himself. One board member tapped his knuckle against the desk. We've reviewed the evidence. It's verified. It's time to vote. I didn't look at him. I looked at the glass wall behind him, watching the reflection of the room as the votes appeared one by one. 7 out of 9. Yes. I stood. Connor Morgan, I said slowly, you are hereby removed from your position as CEO of Morgan Holdings effective immediately. He didn't shout. He didn't slam the desk. He stepped back. And in that second I saw it in his eyes. Not rage, but fear. For the first time, real fear. I walked out before he could speak. Not because I was afraid, but because I had already won. And winners, they don't stop to watch the wreckage. That night, I didn't celebrate. I just went back to my small apartment, the one that had served as my war room for the past year. It was still empty. Soft yellow light, the faint scent of old paper. But for the first time, I felt peace. I made tea. No wine, no music. I didn't need a party to mark the victory, because I didn't take back power for others to see it. I did it so I'd never be looked down on again. News of Connor's dismissal spread across the finance world within 24 hours. The hashtag Thansha, the new Morgan, trended on Bloomberg and Twitter, but I still a name no one knew, and I preferred it that way. A week later, a wedding invitation arrived at my old Brooklyn address. The envelope read, "To Ivy, with sincerity." I recognized the handwriting. Connor's mother. Inside, an invitation to Connor's wedding to the girl who wore the ring. The one they chose to replace me. But one small thing stood out. My name had been crossed out in black ink just beneath the RSVP line. No note, no apology, just a deliberate slash. I smiled, not out of pain, but clarity. No matter the money, no matter the power. To them, I'd always be the waitress of the week. But this time, I no longer wanted to walk into any room they controlled. I had built my own. One big enough to invite those who deserved it and private enough to lock out anyone who didn't. I placed the invitation in a drawer. Didn't tear it. Didn't burn it. Just kept it as silent proof of what I had survived. Then I opened my laptop and sent one email replace the CEO. I nominate myself. I used to think that if I loved hard enough, I'd be chosen. But here's what I've learned. No one is obligated to believe in you except you. And sometimes they don't betray you because you're not enough. They leave because they're afraid you'll realize that you are. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the voice I once gave up. If you've ever been pushed aside, underestimated, or told you weren't worth it, then this story was meant for you. Silence is an answer. And used at the right moment, it speaks louder than anything else. Keep going. Don't ask for permission. And if this felt like your story too, leave a comment. I read every word.